Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs, CGMAs, finance and accounting pros prepare for change and transformation. Today, we're going to be talking about talent, the bridge between people and technology. And joining me is Jack McCullough, president of the CFO Leadership Council, a global organization that's dedicated to empowering the world's senior financial executives. He's also a contributor to the Forbes CFO Network and his book, Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, and his forthcoming book, The Psychopathic CEO and Executive Survival Guide. I just love that title, Jack. And we're going to ask you a little bit about that. We're proud to be partnering with you and the CFO Leadership Council. It's about equipping the present and future leaders of finance and dedicated to empowering senior financial executives to realize success. Jack, say hello to our audience.
Great to be here, Tom. Had a lot of fun the other day, so I was thrilled when you asked me to come back. I guess I passed the audition, huh?
You passed the audition. It's great to have you here. So I'm going to start with, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to start with your book.
Okay.
I think there's a great story there. So tell us about this upcoming book and what possessed you to write it.
Sure, and it's not obvious because, I am a CPA by background, right? Why is he writing about psychopathy? But I worked for a guy that I just thought was a jerk. I'll use that word rather than what's on my mind, actually. And but he's just really weird. And then a couple of years later, we had a program called the Psychopathic CEO, and it was led by a criminal investigator with the FBI. And I'm like, oh my God. He wasn't just a jerk. This guy was a psychopath. And then the agent asked, by a show of hands, how many people feel they may have worked for a psychopath at some point in their career. And about half of us did. And which gave me some mixed feelings because it's like, okay, good, I'm not alone. On the other hand, if psychopaths are having that big of an impact on corporate America, we've got some issues. So I started doing my research, and according to one study, as many as 21% of American CEOs might have psychopathy. 21%. That's higher than the prison rate. The prison rate is like 15%. So, I have a lot of members that have shared some of their stories, and I've learned a lot. And I just want to share what I've learned, and hopefully it'll be helpful to somebody that finds themselves in that situation down the road.
That's fascinating. Now, all right, so a couple of tips then. What would you say to anybody out there in our audience that might think they're working for a psychopathic CEO?
Sure. There's a lot of things that you could do, but one of them is choose whether or not you really want to pick a fight with this person, because from the moment a psychopath meets you, he or she, although it's 90% it's a he in this case, is sizing you up either as an ally or an enemy. And so there have been situations, I've known CFOs have told me they worked for a psychopath for 2 years, and it took that time before they sort of pieced it together, whatnot. But they've been gathering information on you, your personality traits, facts in your life, in case you became an enemy. And they basically got a 2-year head start on a war that you're not even aware exists. Wow. But you get to the point, if you want to fight the battle, document the behavior really clearly. So, and by the way, they're probably spying on your email. As it turns out, there seems to be a lot of that. They will get access to your email, so you might want to document on your home computer. But document everything good and bad that they do, so that if you need to make the case at a board level, you can. And the other thing a lot of people do, they'll avoid labels. And so don't say the boss is a psychopath. For one thing, unless you happen to be a clinical psychiatrist, you're not qualified to make that diagnosis, and you're already running into a credibility problem. But focus on the behavior, because it's actually, as it turns out, it's not a crime to be a psychopath any more than it's a crime to be diabetic or obese. It's just a disease, but focus on the behavior, why it's wrong, and how it hurts the company. And but some of the best advice I give is turn and run and fight another day. Psychopaths, for a lot of reasons, we can talk about in a future meeting, maybe, they're a virtually invincible opponent in corporate America. So.
Yeah, I bet. Well, that's awesome. So some good tips there. So where can they get this book? When is it going to be coming out?
It'll be coming out in June. I'm self-publishing on Amazon. So the good and bad to self-publishing is that I don't have a publisher on my case forcing me to meet deadlines. The bad is I'm not meeting self-imposed deadlines because there's no negative implication if I miss my own deadline, right?
Well, good luck, and I look forward to reading that. So now let's segue from the psychopathic CEO to what's going on with our CFOs. So this past year forced CFOs to really accelerate digital transformation projects, right? I think by one estimate, I think McKinsey said e-commerce accelerated by 10 years in 1 year. That had to have a big impact on many of the CFOs out there, right? So what was it that they, how they did keep up with that pace of change, and what about the skills in their team, and what was the issues they faced with this kind of acceleration?
Yeah, it's an interesting time. I hadn't heard that statistic, but the pace of change in technology was pretty fast anyway, right? So to think that in 1 year it did 10 years, that's kind of incredible. But I've always sort of given the analogy of, when you're in a crisis like this, history shows the companies that roll up into a fetal ball position and think that they're going to survive and just wait it out. That all that is a longer death, but it's still going to result in a death. So the companies that invest in their people and technology, those are the ones that are going to thrive. And that's probably why we had the 10x return. But, great companies, a lot of them maybe had been procrastinating on some of these technology innovations. It's easy to do. But all of a sudden now they're forced to, because it's their very survival that's at stake. And, digitalization thoughtfully done can literally be the difference between surviving and not surviving. But you referenced briefly, what does that have to do with on your teams, right? No one is really prepared for 10 years of acceleration in 1 year, just no matter how thoughtful you are. So there's an obligation and an opportunity to do a ton of training and bring the workforce up to, the workforce that we thought we were going to have apparently in 2030, we're having in 2021.
Yeah, it's funny because it really does get down to that. That stat was from a McKinsey study, right, where they showed that.
What do they know?
Pace of e-commerce. I hear you. But the point is, I think you're right. What we also saw was this, I call it a talent performance gap, where the CFO had his team or her team behind them, but they were behind the skills. So the CFO might have moved quickly into the strategy seat and helped out reshaping the business model and digital transformation, but his or her team wasn't upskilled enough and started to fall behind. And suddenly he or she's in the middle of trying to keep that together. And that's where they said, I think only about 10% of CFOs said they had their teams with the right skills. So they might have had the right skills, but the rest of their team didn't, which speaks right to your, upskilling idea that this is the opportunity to bring them forward faster because of this acceleration.
Yeah, and it's a digital imperative, if you will.
Yeah.
To train the team. I mean, to me, it's remarkable that the CFOs themselves were even able to keep pace, but I guess they sort of had to. But okay, 2020 for a lot of companies, even some really good ones, it was simply about survival and making it to 2021. But congratulations, we've largely done that. But now it's time to invest in technology, and more importantly, the team that runs the technology and benefits from the technology. And with apologies to Frank Sinatra, you can't have one without the other, technology and the team. And one of these days I'll make a pop culture reference from before the 1960s, after the 1970s, but not today, apparently. I go to about 1968, I think. So, but it is true. I mean, okay, great, you survived. Now, for so many reasons, you need to invest in the team and get, skill them up for the modern world. Because guess what? If you don't, your competition is. And, you're back into that slow death scenario rather than hyper growth scenario. And things are moving right now.
Yeah, I think your point there about competition, one of our friends, a guy who's a futurist, often says, if it can be done, it will be done. And if you don't do it, someone else will. And I think that's never been more true because, again, this acceleration of all these things. Thinking about technology, though, as businesses continue this digital transformation, we're talking about technology to enhance productivity, in addition to a lot of other things. But does this mean we're going to see technology replacing people in this coming year? And what does that all mean?
I graduated high school in 1982. And I was told not to study accounting because it would be replaced by computers and there would be no need for accountants by 1990. I couldn't have gotten less accurate advice. And I got it from smart people, by the way, too, very thoughtful people. The reality is, at least to this point, technology has empowered people and empowered employees. It hasn't replaced them. Now, inevitably, some jobs are going to change, sure. Yeah. Automation is going to replace some clerical type of functions. That's inevitable. But really what that means is employees are going to have the opportunity to do work that's more empowering, that makes their companies more competitive and whatnot. And, candidly, maybe a little bit more interesting as well. So it's, there will be some trade-offs, of course, but by and large, technology is going to continue to create a lot more jobs than it's going to take away. And finance and accounting, the need for finance and accounting professionals continues to grow right along with technological progression.
Yeah, right. It's one of the, I'm guessing you're seeing the same thing, but it seems to be one of the top issues right now is finding good talent, right?
Yeah, it's right before the coronavirus, the biggest challenge CFOs were facing was related to the war for talent. And then you went through the downtime, but I'm getting calls daily. People, there's just such a quest for good financial talent right now. Companies are growing. They see, basically it's not going to be 10 years in 1 year, like McKinsey said with technology, but I think we're going to be experiencing about 2 years worth of hiring in 6 months. There's just a lot of opportunity, and it's good and bad, right?
Yeah.
It's a great opportunity to sort of rebuild your team a little bit if you lost people during the process. On the other hand, everybody is going for the all-stars, right? Yeah. So you've got to offer a competitive package to get them. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a degree of building your own, right? If you start to really invest in them and upskilling them, you can build people that can be more productive using those machines smartly, right? That's another example that you can kind of think about.
Yeah, and the other thing, and I'm a boomer, and so to motivate my generation, generally, a lot of it was about money, but to motivate sort of the young up and coming professionals, it's technology and training and giving them work that's on the cutting edge. Obviously money is a part of that, of course, but they are looking for some other things that companies can bring to them. So even when you talk about your competition, it might not be a company that does the same thing as you, right, as much as, it could be a completely different industry, but they're still targeting smart, intellectually curious, up and coming professionals to come work for them. So.
Yeah, you just named a bunch of those skills that everybody's looking for, right? This idea of being able to strategically think, curiosity, huge. And you're right, the automation is going to be at the lower end from the kind of clerical, moving the numbers stuff. So if you're not able to strategically think, then you could be a casualty to this automation trip. But more importantly, like you said, if we augment them with the technology, right, intelligence augmented, if you will, instead of artificial intelligence, I think that's where finance pros ought to be thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world to me.
So all right, let's finish one more thing about technology outside of the finance department. What's the CFO's role in technology, across the business? Is it simply approving the spend and doing the ROI analysis, or are they having a larger role?
They definitely have a larger role. It's more important now than ever because technology drives strategy and strategy drives the need for technology. One of the better CFOs that I know is Gina Mastantuono. She's with ServiceNow, which is, they're about as hot as anybody. And she sort of says it's the CIO and the CFO working together strategically and for the overall good of the entire enterprise, not just the fiefdoms within the enterprise. She doesn't think it's going to go anywhere forward if the CFO and CIO aren't on the same page moving things forward. And she's not in there just as a cost cutter. She's in there thinking the strategy, understanding the corporate objectives and the ways to get to them. In fact, she was the one on our prior call, you might recall I mentioned how Disney was kind of saved by the digitalization process of, Disney Plus rather than theme parks and movies, which had been their bread and butter. She's the one that pointed that out to me. Wow. And she had a couple of, she's a little ahead of the curve with me on these things, but she had a couple of others. But Digital Plus, for those who may have missed our first conversation, that kind of saved Disney to an extent because theme parks are closed, movies are closed, but they were getting a million people a week to join Digital Plus. They hadn't planned on it, but their digitalization strategy was perfect. Even if they didn't understand how perfect it was going to end up being for them. But I think Disney would have found a way to survive anyway. They are Disney, but it certainly made it a lot easier.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a perfect example of the CFO as strategist driving strategy in the business, and it's not all about saving money. It's not the CF no that we always hear people talk about. So yeah, that's a great story. And
hey, I trademarked that phrase, by the way. I believe.
Did you?
I joke. If you read my first book, I do joke about that from time to time, that I invented the phrase CF no.
Well, it's pretty catchy, so I'll attribute it to you from now on.
Well, the funny story is it was the first job I had, and the boss, he was the old school CFO, and he just said no to everything. And so I dubbed him the CF no. And he found out about it, and he called me into his office. I was thinking I'm getting taken to the woodshed, but he told me it was a compliment, and he thought I was spelling it KNOW because he was knowledgeable. I just let him think that. It saved me. It could have been the end of my career if he'd known the truth. So,
I hear you. Talking talent, that's part of the reason that we're partnering with you guys, right? Our CGMA Finance Leadership Program is there to help close that talent performance gap. And we've added digital competencies that are embedded in the core learning, so that at the various levels, the whole CGMA Finance Leadership Program and the professional qualification gives you credentials, certificates, and learning that you can raise the skills of your team as well. And talk a little bit about our upcoming conference that you're having, that we're going to be at with you and the group.
Sure, but happy to. But on your program first, it's fantastically positioned. You probably know as many CFOs as anyone in the country, and I'm probably, third, fourth, or fifth in that list. But do you know of one CFO in the last 10 years who got their job just because they were a good accountant? And no, right? It's the whole broad skill set, and that's what your program is targeted at. So it's, perfect for the times that we live in. But on the conference, which is what you actually asked me about, I'm so rude, but we're calling it A New Hope. And the feeling being that sometime now things are sort of returning to normal, and maybe in some sectors even better than normal. So we have some great speakers lined up, including you, I believe, on the list. But we've got the CFOs of Zoetis, which is actually the largest pharmaceutical for pets. We all love our pets, and we thank Zoetis for their health. Zendesk, one of the hot tech companies in Silicon Valley. We've got Lululemon, fantastic first-year CFO. Took the job during COVID, and they made a major acquisition. Wonderful story she's going to be telling. And we also have our first ever nonprofit CFO keynoting. It's Feeding America, which is basically America's food bank. And it's going to be just a fantastic program, June 7th to June 9th. So.
Awesome. And they can find that on your website, right? At
CFOLC.com. So.
That's what I thought. Okay, awesome. Well, as always, Jack, this has been a pleasure having you back a second time with us. And for everyone out there, for more, you can get a copy of his book, The Psychopathic CEO, an Executive Survival Guide, on Amazon. Look for it sometime around June, we think. Learn about the CFO events, as he said, CFOLC.com. And talk to him on Twitter. It's at Jack_McCullough, McCullough. So thank you, Jack, for joining me. And don't miss other Future Ready Live sessions. We'll be back here on LinkedIn the first and third Tuesday of each month at noon Eastern. We'll see you then. Thank you.